He left their mom pregnant with twins and vanished. 16 years later, they called him out, on stage, after winning a national beauty pageant. Jason Hunt had always believed that success meant sacrifice. At 28, he was already a rising star in the tech and branding world, a blonde, blue-eyed entrepreneur who graced magazine covers and investor panels with the confidence of someone who'd never failed. His calendar was full, his team feared and admired him, and his ambitions left no room for detours. He lived in penthouses, flew private, and had no patience for sentimentality. Emotions were unpredictable. Love was optional. Family? That was something he'd think about after he'd conquered the world. Marie Lawrence didn't fit the mold of Jason's world. She wasn't wealthy, nor did she crave power. She was soft-spoken, grounded, and sincere, with warm chestnut-brown hair, bright blue eyes, and a quiet kind of beauty that drew people in without demanding attention. She had dreams, too, of opening her own floral design studio, of living in a house with a garden, of raising children in a home filled with music and safety. When she and Jason began dating, their worlds collided in a way that felt impossible and magnetic at the same time. She softened him. He fascinated her. For a while, it worked, beautifully, dangerously, and far too fast. When Marie found out she was pregnant, she hesitated for days before telling him. It wasn't just the shock of it, it was the deep fear of how he might react. She rehearsed the words again and again in her head, imagining every possible version of the conversation: joy, disbelief, anger, panic. But nothing prepared her for the silence that followed when she finally told him. He blinked once, stared at her with that calculating gaze she had once found thrilling, and asked, almost flatly, "Are you keeping it?" Marie's throat tightened. "Yes. They're mine. I'm keeping them." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't cry or argue. He stood up from the sleek leather sofa in his high-rise apartment, walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, and placed his hands in his pockets. "Then you'll do it without me," he said, as if delivering a business decision, not a personal one. "My company's about to scale globally. I don't have space for this." "This," she echoed, stunned. "They're your daughters." "They're your choice," he said, still not turning to look at her. "And I've made mine." With that, he walked out of the room. He left her standing there, alone, with her hands on her stomach and her world collapsing in on itself. Marie didn't beg him to stay. She didn't try to guilt him or chase after him. Instead, she gathered her things that same night and left the apartment for good. She couldn't sleep. Couldn't cry. There was just a heavy stillness in her chest, as if part of her had already known this moment was coming. Jason Hunt had always made it clear, business first. He'd loved her, in his own way, but not more than the idea of empire. She left the city within a week. Using the last of her savings, she moved into a small one-bedroom house in a sleepy coastal town where her grandmother had once lived. There was no staff, no high-rise skyline, no money, but there was peace. She sold her car to cover the medical bills and took a job as a seamstress in a local tailor shop. At night, she freelanced, sewing dresses from home and mending clothes for neighbors. The baby bump grew. Her hands stayed busy. Her heart stayed quiet. The ultrasounds revealed she was having twins. Girls. Identical. She laughed through the tears when she heard it. 2 of them. Double the fear, double the beauty, double the love. She started sewing 2 of everything: 2 blankets, 2 tiny dresses, 2 soft hats. She spoke to them at night when she couldn't sleep, told them they were already loved, already enough, already whole. They would never have to wonder if they were wanted. Jason didn't call. Not once. There were no texts, no emails, no second thoughts. He'd vanished into his corporate world and never looked back. Marie stopped hoping he would. The night the twins were born was the kind of night that stayed carved into memory, not because of drama or panic, but because of the quiet weight of it all. The coastal hospital was small, clean, and dimly lit with soft fluorescent lights humming faintly in the halls. Rain tapped steadily against the windows, and the smell of antiseptic mixed with the ocean breeze leaking in through poorly sealed seams in the window frames. Marie was alone. There was no one pacing in the hallway, no excited family in the waiting room, no hand gripping hers through the contractions. Just a nurse named Dana who held her gaze through every wave of pain and a young doctor who looked surprised by her silence and strength. Labor was long and slow, but Marie barely made a sound. She had cried her tears months ago. This was the part she had prepared for, the part she had chosen. And when it was finally over, when the air was suddenly filled with the sharp, twin cries of two tiny, breathing lives, she closed her eyes and let out the first real breath she'd taken in what felt like years. They were placed on her chest seconds apart, two warm, fragile bundles with impossibly small hands and the same delicate, pale lashes. Both had wisps of blonde hair, already light and soft like dandelion fluff, and when their eyes fluttered open, she gasped. Two pairs of blue eyes. Her blue eyes. Not his. She named them Emma and Avery. Emma, the calmer of the two, rested easily against her chest, while Avery, slightly smaller, cried with a strength that made the nurses raise their eyebrows and smile. Marie held them both, whispering their names over and over again like a spell. She had never known a love so immediate, so overwhelming. They were hers. Entirely. And she knew in that moment that she would do whatever it took to give them a life they could be proud of. The early days were harder than anything she had imagined. Sleep came in slivers. Bottles, diapers, fever scares, midnight pacing across creaky floorboards. She lived in a one-bedroom rental where the kitchen doubled as a laundry space, and the baby crib sat inches from her bed. There were nights when she sat on the edge of the mattress, both girls crying in harmony, her arms aching and her eyelids heavy, and she would close her eyes just for a second and ask herself if she could keep going. But she always did. She returned to work 6 weeks after giving birth, taking shifts in the tailor shop during the day while a kind neighbor watched the twins. At night, she would sew until her fingers were stiff, often falling asleep at the machine, waking with thread tangled in her hair. But the bills needed paying, and formula wasn't free. Her body healed slowly, but her will became sharper. Every coin counted. Every decision mattered. She had no one to rely on but herself, and the two little souls who lit up whenever she entered the room. The girls grew fast. By the time they were 2, Emma had a quiet watchfulness about her, an observant, almost protective nature, while Avery was expressive, dramatic, and endlessly curious. They spoke in half-sentences that only Marie could understand, shared everything from pacifiers to secrets, and had a bond that made strangers smile. People in town began to recognize them, the Sunshine Twins, as one older woman in the bakery called them. Their beauty was impossible not to notice, bright blue eyes that mirrored the sea, perfect smiles, and golden hair that curled at the ends like they'd stepped out of a storybook. Marie, though always exhausted, found deep peace in their small routines. Mornings were slow and full of cereal and cartoons. Afternoons meant walks to the park, picking daisies and collecting pebbles. Evenings were bath time chaos and lullabies, whispered stories about stardust and strong girls who saved themselves. On the rare nights when both girls were asleep early and the house was quiet, Marie would sit by the window with a mug of tea and watch the streetlights blink on one by one. She often wondered about Jason, not in longing, but in curiosity. Did he ever wonder what they looked like? Did he ever feel the emptiness where a family could have been? She never spoke his name to the girls. Not out of bitterness, but out of protection. He had made his choice. They didn't need to carry his absence like a burden. Instead, she filled their world with warmth, discipline, affection, and structure. They grew up knowing they were loved beyond measure, even if the world outside their little home was unpredictable. When Emma asked once why they didn't have a daddy like her friend from preschool, Marie had smiled gently and said, "Because we're just lucky enough to have each other. And that's more than enough." She meant it. Years passed, and the girls thrived. Marie stretched every dollar, hunted for sales, and bartered when she had to. She never bought anything for herself unless absolutely necessary. But Emma and Avery had books, art supplies, clean clothes, and always, a home that felt safe. She showed up to every recital, parent night, and doctor's appointment. She clapped the loudest at every school event. Her life revolved around them, not with resentment, but with pride. They were her miracle. And no part of her wished for a different life, only a future where they would never have to doubt their worth the way she once did. By the time Emma and Avery turned 16, the small town that had once been their entire universe had begun to feel just a bit too narrow for their growing ambitions. Their days were filled with school, part-time jobs, and late-night talks on their bedroom floor about the world beyond the coast. The girls had grown into reflections of each other, same golden hair, same piercing blue eyes, but their personalities had begun to branch in opposite directions. Emma was the quiet force, composed, deeply thoughtful, always 2 steps ahead in every situation. She spoke softly but confidently and had a way of commanding attention without trying. Avery, on the other hand, was fiery and expressive, the kind of girl who made friends with waitresses, argued passionately in debate club, and laughed loudest in every room. Together, they were magnetic, inseparable and perfectly balanced. Their beauty, which had once been a casual compliment from neighbors, had now become undeniable. Strangers stopped them on the street. Boutique owners asked if they modeled. At school, teachers and students alike took notice, but it wasn't just about how they looked, it was how they moved through the world. There was a presence about them. Something unteachable. Something earned. It was Avery who first suggested entering a local beauty and talent competition held every spring. It wasn't about vanity, it was about visibility. The winner would receive a scholarship to a summer leadership program, plus a ticket to the national finals in Los Angeles. Emma was hesitant at first. The idea of being judged for appearance made her uncomfortable, even though the competition also included interviews, community service, and academic records. But Marie, who had long ago learned to trust her daughter's instincts, didn't shut it down. Instead, she asked, "Why do you want to do this?" And Avery replied, without hesitation, "Because we have something to say. And maybe someone important needs to hear it." The preparation took weeks. They juggled schoolwork and rehearsals, built their own presentation boards for the advocacy segment, and practiced answering impromptu questions about leadership, integrity, and vision. Marie couldn't afford a coach, so she became one, sitting in the living room with flashcards, reviewing posture and tone, helping them stitch dresses when the ones from secondhand stores didn't fit quite right. They laughed a lot during those nights, but there was a growing sense of seriousness too. This was more than a pageant. This was a platform. The night of the regional competition, the auditorium was packed. Parents, students, and local news crews filled the seats, and Emma and Avery, wearing matching navy dresses and confident smiles, stood backstage waiting for their moment. Marie sat in the front row, heart pounding, hands clenched in her lap. She didn't care if they won. She just wanted them to feel proud. When they stepped on stage, a hush fell over the crowd. The lights caught in their hair, and for a moment, the audience seemed to forget how to breathe. They introduced themselves, not as identical twins, but as individuals with shared strength. Avery spoke first, fiery and brilliant, about the importance of women supporting women. Emma followed, with calm eloquence, about resilience, about how growing up without a father taught them to lead themselves. The judges were stunned. Not just by beauty, but by substance. In the talent segment, Avery performed a dramatic monologue while Emma played original piano music she had composed. In the advocacy round, they shared a joint presentation on building confidence in young girls from underserved communities. Their sincerity was unmistakable. When the winners were announced, the auditorium erupted. Emma and Avery stood under the spotlight, their hands tightly clasped, eyes wide with disbelief. The metal ribbons were placed around their necks, and the announcer's voice boomed as confetti fluttered down like snow. They had done it. Not just one, but claimed their voices in front of an audience that would never forget them. After the event, as they stood in the dressing room removing makeup and laughing over silly backstage moments, a representative from the national pageant approached them. She was polished, older, with sharp eyes and a warm smile. She handed them a business card and said, "We'd like to fast-track you to the national finals in Los Angeles. You're exactly what this generation needs to see." The trip to LA wasn't something they could afford, but word of their victory spread fast through town. Within days, a fundraiser had been started by their school, and donations poured in. Marie, overwhelmed and deeply touched, found herself believing in possibility again. The girls would go. They would stand on a national stage. And whatever happened, they would already have won. Before they left, Emma asked Marie one night, as they sat together folding clothes into suitcases, "Do you think he'll be watching?" She didn't say his name. She didn't have to. Marie hesitated, then said, "I don't know. But if he does, he'll see exactly what he gave up." Emma didn't ask again. They packed, boarded the plane, and took their first steps into the world that had once felt so far away. What they didn't know, what none of them could have known, was that someone was watching. And that their moment on that stage would be far more than a performance. It would be a reckoning. The ballroom at the Grand Regal Hotel in Los Angeles shimmered with elegance and nerves. It was the kind of place where success clung to every surface: gold-trimmed walls, crystal chandeliers, velvet-covered chairs, and tables dressed in fine linens and name cards bearing the titles of CEOs, investors, and media executives. It was not the kind of place Emma and Avery had ever imagined themselves standing in, but here they were, two 16-year-old girls from a quiet coastal town, preparing to walk onto the biggest stage of their lives. The national pageant finals were not just about beauty. It was an event that celebrated leadership, intelligence, creativity, and presence. Girls from across the country had arrived with carefully curated wardrobes, professional coaches, and parents who had been grooming them for this since preschool. Emma and Avery had none of that. What they had was each other, their mother's unconditional belief in them, and a strength born not from privilege but from persistence. They didn't wear designer dresses or carry themselves with rehearsed perfection. They wore confidence stitched into every step and purpose behind every word they would speak. Meanwhile, in a private VIP section just above the ballroom, Jason Hunt adjusted the cufflinks on his tailored suit and looked out over the room with mild disinterest. He had been invited to judge the final round of the competition as a symbolic gesture. His company had recently launched a grant initiative for young women in entrepreneurship, and his name carried enough weight to draw press. To him, it was just another formal event, another performance of image and diplomacy. He hadn't read the bios of the contestants. He never did. He'd show up, offer a few polished remarks, smile for the cameras, and disappear back into his controlled, efficient world. When the announcer's voice echoed through the speakers, calling the audience to attention, Jason took his seat. He glanced at the program briefly, flipping through pages filled with headshots and mission statements. One page caught his eye, not because he recognized anyone, but because of the photograph. Two blonde girls standing side by side, both with striking blue eyes, wearing matching navy dresses and holding hands. They looked familiar. Uncomfortably so. Their names were Emma and Avery Lawrence. Lawrence. His heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be. He leaned forward slightly, skimming the brief bio printed below the photo. Raised by a single mother. Advocates for youth empowerment. Strong academic backgrounds. Coastal town upbringing. No mention of a father. His throat tightened. The music began and the girls stepped on stage. The lights caught their golden hair, their eyes sparkled under the glow, and when they began to speak, one after the other, seamless and sure, Jason's entire world tilted. Every syllable struck him like a memory he had buried too deep. The curve of their jawlines. The way one smiled with restraint and the other lit up the whole stage. The cadence of their voices. His mind raced back 16 years to a living room where a woman with warm eyes and a shaking voice had told him she was pregnant. To a moment when he had chosen silence over responsibility. Jason sat frozen. The entire ballroom applauded around him, but he couldn't move. And then it happened. At the close of their presentation, Avery looked into the audience, her voice suddenly gentler, almost trembling with emotion, and said, "We dedicate this moment to the woman who never gave up on us, and to the man who walked away. If you're watching, we hope you finally see what you left behind." Emma took her hand and added, "Dad, do we matter to you now?" The audience gasped. Some thought it was theatrical. Some thought it was scripted. But Jason knew better. His stomach dropped. There was no script. Only truth. The lights dimmed and the crowd erupted in applause, oblivious to the man in the judge's box sitting pale and stunned, his hands clenched in his lap, his breath shallow. He had come here thinking this was just another obligation. Instead, he had come face to face with the past he had tried so hard to erase. His daughters, his own flesh and blood, were standing on that stage. And they had recognized him before he had even realized who they were. He couldn't look away. Every instinct in him screamed to run, to leave, to avoid the shame and the questions. But something deeper held him there. The sheer force of the moment pinned him in place. He had missed everything, their first words, their first steps, their first heartbreaks, and now they stood tall without him, not asking for anything except to be seen. And they had asked the question he had never been brave enough to ask himself. Do I matter to them? And more painfully, do they still matter to me? The answer rose in him like a wave too heavy to contain. Yes. More than anything. And he had no idea what he could possibly do to make it right. Jason didn't sleep that night. After the gala ended, he slipped out quietly, avoiding the crowd, the press, the post-event cocktails, and the congratulatory remarks from sponsors who had no idea that the show had ended his ability to breathe properly. He walked through the city like a man disoriented, as though Los Angeles had become unfamiliar to him in just a few hours. Everything he thought he knew about his life, everything he had convinced himself he had done for the right reasons, collapsed beneath the weight of what he had seen on that stage. Back in his hotel suite, he stood for hours by the window, staring at the glittering skyline. He didn't touch the drink someone had left for him. He didn't check his phone. He replayed the moment, those words, that voice, their eyes, as if watching a scene from someone else's life. But it wasn't someone else's. It was his. They were his daughters. There was no doubt. Every instinct, every memory of Marie's eyes, her strength, the way she once looked at him when she said, "You'll regret this," echoed in the faces of the girls who had just taken a national stage and stolen the breath of everyone in the room. He kept wondering how it had come to this. How he could have missed 16 years of their lives. He had known about the pregnancy. He remembered that moment clearly. Marie had stood in his apartment, nervous and brave, her hands on her stomach, her voice trembling but steady. He had shut down. He had chosen business, expansion, control. He had told himself at the time that she was strong, she'd be fine, and if the child was really his, maybe someday he'd make it right. But someday never came. He buried the guilt. He worked harder. He dated, but never let anyone close. He built his company into a giant because conquering the world was easier than facing what he had left behind. And now, suddenly, he was faced with the reality of that decision. It wasn't abstract anymore. It had names. Emma. Avery. They were no longer babies he could pretend didn't exist. They were powerful, articulate young women who had built lives without him, and then looked him in the eye and asked if they mattered. The shame was unbearable. By morning, Jason sat at the desk in his room, paper and pen in front of him. He hadn't written a letter by hand in years, but typing felt wrong. It felt too polished, too safe. This needed to be raw. He began slowly, unsure at first, but the words started to pour out. He told Marie the truth. That he had been afraid. That he had been selfish. That he had buried his emotions in his work because it gave him something he could control. He wrote that he had never stopped thinking about her, not really, and that he had wondered so many times over the years what kind of mother she had become, what kind of girls she had raised. He told her that he saw now what she had done, what she had sacrificed, and that she had given their daughters something he never could, the strength to stand tall in a world that too often tries to silence girls like them. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He knew he didn't deserve it. But he asked for a chance. A single chance to speak. To look his daughters in the eye and tell them that they were never forgettable. That even if he failed every test of fatherhood, he could at least try to be honest now. He left the letter at the hotel front desk, addressed to Marie, who he knew was staying just a few floors below. He didn't expect a response. In truth, he expected her to tear it up and never speak to him again. But a part of him had to try. He couldn't leave that ballroom echoing in his chest for the rest of his life without reaching back in some way. He didn't hear anything for a full day. Then, that evening, as the sun sank behind the city, he received a text from an unknown number. It was short and sharp. "We got your letter. Don't call. Don't visit. But we'll let the girls decide." Jason stared at the message for a long time. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't final either. It was a door, just slightly open. A chance, however fragile, to face what he had run from. It was more than he expected. More than he deserved. That night, he sat on the edge of his bed, exhausted but oddly at peace. For the first time in 16 years, he wasn't running. And for the first time, he allowed himself to hope, not for redemption, but for the beginning of something real. Something honest. Something that might, one day, become love. The message came late in the evening, and when Emma saw the name on the screen, Jason Hunt, her chest tightened in a way she wasn't prepared for. She had stared at it for several long minutes, not touching it, not opening it, just watching the name glow on her phone like something radioactive. Avery was in the room, sprawled across the bed reading a magazine article about their win at the national pageant, her mood still buzzing from the adrenaline of it all. Emma didn't speak right away. She simply handed her the phone, and waited. Avery sat up slowly after reading. She looked at her sister, serious now, and asked, "Do you want to respond?" Emma didn't know. She wasn't angry, she thought she would be, but the overwhelming emotion wasn't rage. It was something more complicated, like sadness mixed with curiosity and fear. It was easier when he was just a name from a story, the faceless man who left their mother behind. But now, he had a voice. A face. A confession. And even if she didn't want to admit it, his letter had left a mark. Marie hadn't said much after reading it. She had passed it to them the day before, carefully folded, her eyes heavy with caution. "You should read this," she said simply. "Then we'll talk." So they had read it. Twice. Then 3 times. Every line was laced with guilt, but not manipulation. He hadn't begged. He hadn't blamed. He had told them the truth, even when it made him look small. That, more than anything, made it hard to dismiss. It was the first time someone had acknowledged the gaping space where a father should have been. The next day, Emma sent him a message. She kept it brief. "We got your letter. We're thinking. No promises." A minute later, she added, "We'll meet you once. Just to talk." She pressed send before she could change her mind. Marie was hesitant, but didn't stop them. She had spent 16 years protecting them from the fallout of a man's failure, and now that he had appeared, apologizing, trembling, but present, she knew the decision had to be theirs. She warned them gently, "This doesn't have to be anything more than a conversation. You don't owe him anything." But she also admitted something she hadn't said out loud before. "If he truly wants to make things right, even a little, maybe you deserve to hear him say that to your face." The meeting was set for a small cafe tucked into a quiet corner of the city. They chose the location. Neutral, safe, public. Avery wore a sharp blazer she'd borrowed from a friend, her chin lifted high like armor. Emma wore something simple, classic, her hair pulled back tightly as if to hide the nerve she couldn't quite suppress. They arrived together, as always, side by side, their bond unspoken but iron-strong. When they saw him through the cafe window, already seated, no assistant, no suit, just a man in a gray sweater with his hands nervously folded, they stopped at the door. "This changes nothing," Emma whispered. "Only if we let it," Avery replied. They walked in. Jason stood immediately, unsure whether to smile or stay solemn. He looked older than they remembered from the stage, tired, but genuine. He didn't reach for a hug, didn't offer his hand. He just said, "Thank you for coming." For several long seconds, no one said anything. Then Avery sat. Emma followed. The silence was thick, but not hostile. Just full of everything that had never been said. Jason took a breath. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he began. "I don't deserve that. I made a mistake, a huge one, and I spent too many years convincing myself that I couldn't fix it. That it would be better if I stayed away. That I didn't know how to be the father you needed. But now I know the silence didn't protect anyone. It just made the absence louder." Emma watched him closely. She wasn't looking for excuses, she was looking for cracks. For truth. She found them in the tremble of his voice, the way he never broke eye contact even when his hands fidgeted beneath the table. Avery tilted her head, more skeptical. "You say you regret it. So what now? You want to make up 16 years in a few coffee meetings?" "No," he said immediately. "I can't. And I won't pretend to. But I want to start with this one moment, if you'll let me. Just one. Then the next. Then maybe another." They talked for nearly an hour. It wasn't easy. The questions came fast, some painful, some raw. "Why didn't you call? Did you ever wonder what we looked like? Were you even the tiniest bit proud from afar?" Jason answered every one, even when the answers painted him in an ugly light. And when Emma finally asked, "Did you ever love our mother?" he paused for a long time before responding. "Yes," he said quietly. "I just didn't know how to be a man worthy of that love. And by the time I figured it out, I thought it was too late." When they left the cafe, no one cried. There were no hugs or long goodbyes. But there was a shift. Something had been acknowledged. A door opened, not wide, but slightly, enough for air to get through. That night, back at the hotel, Avery said, "I don't trust him yet." Emma nodded. "Me neither. But I didn't hate him either." Emma smiled faintly. "No. And that's what scares me." They didn't tell Marie everything. Just enough. "He showed up," Emma said. And he didn't lie. Marie listened, her expression unreadable. Then, softly, she whispered, "That's more than he ever did before." And for the first time in their lives, the idea of having a father didn't feel like a fairy tale or a betrayal. It felt like a possibility, uncertain, unpromised, but real. In the weeks that followed their first meeting, Emma and Avery found themselves thinking about Jason more than they expected. At first, it was easy to pretend nothing had changed. They went back to school, answered questions from classmates about the pageant, and helped Marie reorganize the living room, which had become a shrine of articles, photos, and congratulatory notes from family, friends, and strangers alike. But beneath the normal rhythm of their days, something had shifted. The presence of their father, once an empty space, now a breathing reality, cast a quiet shadow over everything. Jason didn't push. He didn't flood their phones with texts or try to barge into their lives. Instead, he did the opposite. He gave them space. Every few days, he sent a message, never more than a few sentences. Sometimes it was a link to a book he thought they might like, or a video of a young woman giving a TED talk that reminded him of them. Other times it was nothing more than, "Thinking of you. Hope school's going well." The restraint was unexpected. It made Emma wonder if he truly understood just how much damage had been done. Avery, true to herself, remained guarded. She read every message but didn't always respond. She watched him closely when they met, because, to their surprise, they agreed to meet again. The second time was less formal, in a bookstore cafe near campus. Then a third, at a quiet botanical garden Emma had always loved. Each meeting unraveled a little more of the wall between them. Jason listened more than he spoke. When he did talk, he didn't posture or try to reclaim a title he had long abandoned. He asked about their lives. What they loved. What scared them. What they dreamed about becoming. Marie kept her distance. She didn't ask for updates, though they knew she wanted to. Sometimes she would glance up when they came home, searching their faces for something unspoken. When Avery finally told her about the third meeting, Marie only nodded and said, "Just don't let him rewrite the story." It wasn't bitterness in her voice, it was protection. Emma began to notice the way Jason looked at them, not with guilt but with a kind of reverence. As if he couldn't believe they existed, and even more, that they were willing to sit across from him at all. He told them stories about his childhood, about the things he got wrong in life, about how success had often been a shield he used to avoid looking at his own reflection. He spoke once, carefully, about the day Marie had told him she was pregnant. He didn't try to excuse what he did. He only said, "I didn't know how to be anything other than what I thought the world expected from me. But what I needed to be was yours." One afternoon, after meeting Jason for lunch, the girls returned home to find an envelope on the kitchen table. It was unmarked. Inside were copies of 2 college tuition deposit letters, fully paid. No signature, no letter, just confirmation. Emma's to Stanford. Avery's to NYU. They stared at it for a long time before speaking. "He did this," Avery said. Emma nodded. "Without telling us." Marie came into the kitchen moments later. Her eyes fell on the papers, and she froze. Then she sat down, quietly, as if trying to steady herself. "He wanted to help," Emma said. "He didn't say anything. Just did it." For the first time in a long time, Marie looked unsure. She rubbed her temples, then met their eyes. "I don't know how to feel about it. He didn't have the right to disappear. But I won't lie, this changes things. For both of you." Later that night, Emma found a voice message from Jason. He sounded hesitant, like he had debated sending it at all. "I know I can't buy my way back into your lives," he said. "That's not what this was. I just wanted to give something without asking anything in return. If you decide not to speak to me again, I'll still be glad I helped. I wanted to give you the chances I once threw away." Emma didn't cry. But she lay awake for a long time that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how a person could be so deeply flawed and yet trying so hard to be better. Avery surprised her the next day by suggesting something neither of them had dared mention before. "What if we invite him to the awards banquet?" she asked. Emma looked up from her laptop, confused. "The school one?" "Yeah. It's nothing huge, but it's still something. He doesn't have to speak. Just be there." Emma hesitated. "Are you ready for that?" "I don't know," Avery admitted. "But maybe he needs to see what it looks like when you show up. Quietly. Without credit." They didn't tell Marie right away. They wanted it to be their decision. A moment they could offer not out of pity or obligation, but out of control. So they sent Jason a short message: "Banquet. Friday night. 7 p.m. No tie required." His reply came back almost instantly: "Wouldn't miss it." Friday arrived, and the girls stood in the school auditorium, surrounded by classmates and teachers and community members. Their names were called for academic excellence, leadership, and service. When they looked out into the crowd, they saw him. Jason. Standing in the back. Alone. He didn't wave. He didn't try to make himself known. He just stood there, watching, clapping, tears quietly welling in his eyes. And in that moment, something in them both shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the realization that some absences can, piece by piece, be rewritten by presence. That sometimes, the greatest apology isn't spoken, it's shown. And that healing doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes, it arrives as a father, standing quietly in the back of an auditorium, finally learning how to stay. The day of the National Scholarship Gala arrived with the kind of surreal anticipation that made the air feel electric. It was being held in Washington, D.C., in a grand hall lined with marble columns and glowing chandeliers, the kind of place that seemed designed for people with famous last names and storied legacies. Emma and Avery had been invited as two of the youngest honorees of the year, recognized not just for their academic achievements, but for their advocacy, leadership, and public speaking following the national pageant. In the months since, their story had quietly traveled, two sisters raised by a single mother, speaking truth to power on a stage where silence had once reigned. The world had listened. Jason flew in separately, at the girls' invitation. They had agreed he could attend, not as a guest of honor, not seated beside them, but somewhere in the audience. They were still learning how to trust him, still navigating the fragile thread between memory and possibility, but he had shown up consistently, never demanding, never late, always present in quiet ways that mattered. He had attended Emma's science fair, Avery's debate finals, and even brought Marie a rare flower from a grower in Oregon when he found out she once dreamed of opening her own floral shop. He never mentioned the gesture again. He left it on her doorstep with a note, *I remember more than you think. I'm sorry for what I chose. I want to honor what you built, *. The girls had begun, slowly, to believe that his presence wasn't a performance. It was an effort. And that, in itself, meant more than words ever could. The gala was elegant and formal, but Emma and Avery walked into it like women who had earned every step. They wore dresses tailored by Marie herself, modern, simple, stunning, and pinned their hair in styles that echoed each other's without being identical. They no longer needed to match to be connected. Their bond was in every glance, every breath they took before stepping onto a stage. They were no longer the twins who surprised a millionaire father. They were leaders in their own right. As the evening unfolded, the girls listened to speeches from senators, philanthropists, and educators. But it was the final moment of the night that belonged to them. The host stepped up to the podium and began with their introduction. Our closing remarks tonight will be delivered by two young women who have reminded us all what courage, resilience, and truth sound like, Emma and Avery Lawrence. The spotlight followed them as they walked toward the stage, heels clicking softly on the polished floor. The applause grew as they took their place behind the microphone. Jason, sitting near the back of the room, rose with the rest of the crowd, but his hands trembled slightly. He wasn't sure what they were about to say. He hadn't asked. He didn't want to know in advance. He believed in letting them speak freely, even if what they said cut deep. Avery started. Her voice, as always, was confident, clear. When we were younger, we used to ask our mother if we were missing anything. If not having a father meant we were somehow incomplete. And every time, she said the same thing, "You're not missing anything, because you already have everything." The room was still. Emma stepped forward next. But the truth is, we did miss something. We missed being known by the person who helped create us. We missed seeing someone try for us. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And we've learned something important this year: absence doesn't have to be permanent. They glanced at each other, then at the audience. Avery spoke again. We are not the product of abandonment. We are the result of a mother's resilience. And we are the proof that people can change, if they choose to show up. Emma added softly, our father didn't raise us. But now, he shows up. Quietly. Humbly. And sometimes, that's the loudest form of love. The applause was thunderous. Jason remained seated, tears silently rolling down his face, hidden in the shadows of the hall. He didn't want recognition. He had received something better, acknowledgement. A space in their story, no longer defined by failure, but by redemption earned one day at a time. After the gala, the girls found him waiting just outside the hall, hands in his pockets, looking smaller than the world had ever allowed him to appear. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. Avery leaned into his shoulder. Emma took his hand. Marie appeared moments later, dressed in a simple black gown she had altered herself. Her eyes met Jason's for the first time in weeks. She nodded. Not cold, not warm. Just honest. Thank you, she said, not for the past, but for now. Jason nodded back. You raised them into everything I wasn't, and everything I wish I had been. She smiled then, just a little. You still have time. As the four of them stepped out into the night, the city shimmered around them. There were still wounds. There would always be missing pieces, unspoken regrets, what-ifs they could never answer. But there was also space now, for presence, for growth, for second chances that weren't perfect but were real. Sometimes, family isn't built in the beginning. Sometimes, it's chosen at the end, and carried forward. Together. The ending of this story isn't just satisfying, it's meaningful in a way that lingers. It doesn't rely on fantasy or dramatic twists to redeem the past. Instead, it honors the quiet, messy truth of what healing really looks like. The story doesn't ask us to excuse abandonment or erase pain. It asks something braver, to consider that people can grow, and that showing up late, with humility, consistency, and no demands, can still matter. What makes this finale powerful is that no one pretends the scars are gone. Emma and Avery don't rush into calling Jason Dad. Marie doesn't fall back in love. But through choice, effort, and time, they allow space for something new. Not a return to what could have been, but the creation of what still can be. In the end, this story is about reclamation. Not just of a father's role, but of dignity, voice, and the right to define your own family on your own terms. And that's what makes it beautiful.